Hello everyone, it's Super Mario Carl, and after a 2-year absence this time, we will be getting the next part of All Tomorrows. Alright, let's get into it. Finger Fishers. Their ancestors were trapped in an archipelago world, a planet sprinkled with many small continents and countless islands over interconnected networks of calm, shallow seas. Like a magnified Aegean, this place was a terrestrial paradise in many respects, except that after the coup, no minds were left to enjoy it. On this vacant biosphere, evolution was quick to begin her blind, unpredictable dance. Once feral, the descendants of degenerate humans adapted themselves to every available niche. No matter how exotic, how outlandish, one group learnt to pluck fish from the lazy shores. Millennia passed, and they settled more into their piscatorial lifestyle. Elongated fingers became ambulatory fish hooks. Teeth modified for a generalized diet became like needle-like affairs. Lined up neatly in a long, thin muzzle, in less than a few million years, the finger fishers established themselves as a prominent lineage. There was scarcely a beach, an island, or an estuary that was devoid of their pale, lanky forms. As prolific as they were, the fishers were still no better than animals. Their humanity would only come after another spasm of outlandish adaptations. Hedonists. Even the blissful existence of the finger fishers would have seemed bothersome to the hedonists, for their kind was not evolved, but designed for a life of pleasure. The coup had kept them as pampered pets, set loose in a tropical island world of succulent fruits, bountiful trees, and calm, lapping lakes full of sweet, bacterial manna. Furthermore, the hedonists were left as the only animals life on the place. They had no choice but to enjoy it to the fullest. In normal conditions, any given species would quickly crowd out such an utopian environment. But normal conditions had never been the point of the coup redesign. They had altered their subjects so that they could conceive only after mating an enormous number of potential suitors, continually over a period of decades. While this took care of the population problem, it also made the species less adaptable. Without any point in sexual competition, natural selection would progress only at a glacial pace. Fortunately, their stable microcosm remained free of environmental catastrophes even after the coup left. All these changes had also made the hedonists' day. Their lives were just juxtaposed routines of browsing, sleeping, and mind-blowing sex, troubled neither by the concerns of disease or pregnancy. Aloof and carefree, they enjoy the most pleasurable times of all mankind, albeit with their intellectual capabilities of 3-year-olds. It didn't really matter, though. Who needed to think when having such a nice time, after all? Insectophagi. Nondescript, quaint human species abounded in the post-coup galaxy. Hundreds of them lived out simple, unnoticed lives, never developing to become sentient, never learning their true heritage as star-born human beings. Most of them went extinct, not to be missed or even remembered. Those that lingered on managed to survive in shady, quiet niches, never again making any impact on the celestial scheme of things. One such species was the insectophagi. They had quietly adapted themselves for a diet of colonial insects and small animals. They had faces covered with leathery plates, claw-like hands to dig out prey, and worm-like tongues to scoop them up. All in all, they weren't special in any particular way, but a combination of galactic invasions, coincidence, and pure luck would later make them the longest enduring of all Eurostarmen. The meek would inherit the cosmos, though not just yet. For now, the insectophagi were concerned only with the location of insect colonies and the onset of the mating season. Spacers. It must be remembered that the Star People did not succumb entirely to the coup invasion. While their worlds fell away one by one, some Star People took refuge in the void of space. One after another, entire communities scrambled into generation ships and cast themselves off into the darkness, hoping to go unnoticed by the beings that had overrun their galaxy. Desperate times made for desperate measures, as the Starmen had observed during their initial colonialization of the galaxy. Life in generation ships inevitably lead to mass insanity and anarchy. This time, humans had to adapt themselves or face extinction. Entire asteroid fields were confiscated and hollowed out to make spaceships of unseen size. These hollow shells cradled bubbles of precious air and water, but no artificial gravity of any kind. It was discovered that a purely ethereal existence would ease the stress of the interstellar exile, provided that its inhabitants were adapted for life inside such an environment. Furthermore, people were forced to change themselves. In an atmospherically sealed, gravity-free environment, their bones were left free to grow longer, thinner, spindlier. Their circulatory and digestive systems were pressurized to avoid heart problems and congestion. The latter change had another advantageous side effect. Humans could navigate through the void with jets of air expelled from their modified anuses. Such experiments were numerous and usually plagued with failure, yet they did succeed in creating a future, sealed tight in their moon-sized, air-filled, weightless havens. The descendants of the Star People managed to evade the scourge of the coup. It was an endless diaspora. Even after the coup left, they would find themselves too divergent to have anything to do with their ancestral lifestyles. The survivors of the initial hurdle would never set foot on a planet again. 40 million years from today, spacers like this individual are the only truly sentient beings that survive. They are so comfortable in their weightless refuges that the fates of their bestial cousins elsewhere do not concern them. They are also painfully rare. Their entire population in the Milky Way does not exceed a few dozen arcs and 100 billion souls. Ruin Haunters. A particular human species, singled out by its lucky access to the heritage of its stellar ancestors, would eventually get to play a leading role in the shape of things to come. They had gotten through the coup invasions with relatively little degradation. Yes, they had been reduced to the level of apes, but the recovery had been quick. Apparently, the coup had not worked as hard as suppressing their intelligence, nor had they made a comparable effort to wipe away the material traces of the Starmen. Even after millions of years, enormous ruins of the global urban spaces littered the continents of their world. Thus did the Ruin Haunters earn their names. With developed minds and unrestricted access to the wisdom of the ancient cities, the exponential pace of their development was only natural. One by one, they deciphered and built upon the secrets of the bygone Star People, until they almost equaled their galactic ancestors in wisdom and skill. All this development happened in an unnaturally short period of time, and sometimes the old technologies were not even understood as they were blindly replicated. Needless to say, such a pace of development put premature stresses on the social and political structures of the Ruin Haunters. They barely survived the 5 consecutive world wars that raked their planet, 2 of which were thermonuclear exchanges. They made it, though. Their baptism with fire had hardened and awakened them. The wars united them politically and pushed their technological capabilities even beyond the level of the Starmen. Coincidentally, they also developed a dangerous form of autochthonous madness. The Ruin Haunters had come to believe they were the sole descendants and the true heirs of the Star People, and they were ready and willing to do anything in order to claim their fictitious, bygone golden age. Only 1,000 years after the coup departure, a Ruin Haunter wanders among the shattered remains of a city of the Star People. The dominating form of an even greater coup pyramid can be seen in the background. Sentience reborn. If any sort of periodical arrangement can be brought to the history of mankind, the post-coup era of emerging human animals can be likened to a series of millennial dark ages. However, like any dark age situation, these periods of silence had finite lifespans. One by one, like stars emerging from the fog, a new civilization were born out of the shattered remnants of mankind. In some rare cases, the recovery was swift and straightforward. In most other situations, it came only after a lengthy series of adaptive radiations, extinctions, and secondary diversifications. Within these lines of descent, there was as much distance between the initial post-humans and their intelligent descendants as between the first Cretaceous fuzzballs and Homo sapiens. Sooner or later, human intelligence returned to the cosmos, but except from their shared ancestry, these new people had nothing in common with the people of today, or even each other. Extinction. Not all human animals made it through. In fact, it must be realized that the majority of post-coup humans died out during the eras of transition. Extinction, the utter and absolute death of entire family, entire community, entire species, was rampant in the galaxy. There was nothing cruel or dramatic in all this. Extinction was as common and as natural as speciation. Sometimes a species simply failed to adapt to competition, or the abrupt change of conditions. In other occasions, their numbers dwindled across imperceptible gulfs of time. This way or the other, human animals faded out. In all of this death, however, there was new life. As one species vacated a certain niche, others would step in to take its place. Adaptive radiations would follow, filling in the blanks with myriads of diverse and varied forms. Despite the fallen, the flow of life would proceed, blazing in a constant turnover. The fossil of an extinct aquatic human from a forgotten colony world. Unbeknownst to the universe, this kind adapted, flourished, and died out soon after the coup retreat. His tale serves to tell us that all that is alive will inevitably perish, and it is the journey, not the conclusion, that matters. Snake people, descendants of the worms. The scorching sun eventually cooled down, and life flooded back to the surface from her subterranean stronghold. As animals of all kinds exploded into the terrestrial niches that had been left vacant for millennia, so did the descendants of the worms. On the surface, they found new opportunities as entire assemblages of serpentine grazers, swimmers, predators, and people. One form descended from tree-climbing Malayan snakes, re-evolved the human intelligence that had lain dormant for so long. They observed, contemplated, and philosophized with novel, spirally coiled brains, and handled the world with a singular pelvic hand bone out from the remnants of their ancestors' feet. They looked nothing at all like their distant human ancestors, but their social development followed a similar path. Several agricultural world empires, followed by industrial revolutions, social experiments, world wars, civil wars, and globalization. But then again, socio-political parallelism in history did not necessarily imply a similar or even recognizably human world. Modern cities of the global snake world were tangles of pipe-like roads, branching three-dimensional railroads, and windowless hole-like buildings. Through their knotted architecture differed from region to region. These settlements generally looked like kilometer-wide balls of glass, metal, plastic, and cloth, wrapped so tightly that a human of today would find it impossible to move inside them. Plazas and open areas were totally absent, as they presented navigational obstacles and areas of insecurity. Their evolutionary background in the trees had made the snake people into borderline agoraphobes. None of these, of course, were unusual to the snakes in any way. Their relatively alien lifestyle was as particular to them as ours is to us. All across their world, the arterial cities throbbed with people, each with their own joys, sorrows, and chores, living out the lives as humans as any other intelligent beings. A snake person at home, enjoying a book while smoking and listening to a vibrational ground music. Through the open door can be seen chaotic tangle of the city. Killer folk, descendants of the human predators. The carnivores also rebounded into civilization. Their journey involved a series of changes during which they lost the adaptations that had allowed them to endure as the top predators of their world. The saber teeth, once used for slashing through sinew and trachea, became fragile and thin, useful only as organs of social display. The hook-like thumb claws were also reduced, but not deleted. In their place, the last two digits rotated perpendicularly to become newfangled graspers. All this gracility, however, did not mean weakness. Although they were no longer specialized for hunting, the killer folk could still kill with their bare hands, but only if they really wanted to. What enormous claws and teeth could not do, they could easily achieve with a bow, arrow, flintlock repeater, or gas rifle. Their descent from predators gave the killer folk a unique social profile. Almost all of their religions had rituals allowing for periods of completely natural, animalistic hunts and duels. This necessity of venting these atavistic urges also led to the formation of religious hunter nobilities, privileged warriors who were killed in the arts of hunting, war, and murder. Entire societies were assembled underneath these ruling classes, orderly communities that erupted once every year into an orgy of death, sex, and prayer. For thousands of years, nomadic warriors, together with their vast herds of once human livestock, chased and battled each other across a chessboard of continents. All of this chaos was to be swept apart with the advent of modernity. In a development comparable to an industrial revolution, one nation pack of killers devised methods of settled, intensive factory farming. Organized state structure, secularism, and technological leapfrogging were quick to follow. Needless to say, such developments polarized the world into bands of progressive, developed factory herders and increasingly fanatical hunting states. While one condemned their old animal ways, the other side embraced them with blind zealotry. This was their crisis of modernity, the balkanization of the progressive and conservative factions on the road to global unity. Fortunately, the killers managed to pull themselves through, even after drifting dangerously close to global conflict at certain points. A young male killer tours one of the myriad ruined fortresses in his country, testimony of their species' bloody protean history. The planet of the killer folk is an archaeologist's paradise. It has more buried dark ages, ruined cultures, and fallen kingdoms than any other world. Tool breeders, descendants of the swimmers. They used to be simple creatures, descendants of a battered people that had taken to the sea. Their remote sapiens ancestors would give them such beings no chance of sentient comeback. For that, they thought that technological advances were impossible in the fluid medium of the oceans, but the swimmers disproved such predictions by founding one of the most advanced and most outrageously alien cultures of the entire human lineage. Fire, the cornerstone of industrial engineering, was almost impossible to sustain and use underwater, but the breeders simply chose another path. When complex tool-making proved impracticable, they began to breed their tools and machines for them. It had started long before the species was even intelligent. In the endless variety of the seas, the swimmers always adopted and controlled the organisms that were useful in some way. Once domesticated, these creatures were willingly or unintentionally modified through artificial selection and conditioning. The process was slow, but once underway, its effects were formidable. A modern city of the breeders was a sight to behold. Huge, heart-like creatures pumped out nutritious fluids to a network of self-repairing living conduits. This was their equivalent of a power grid, and it reached every single one of the breeders' huge exoskeletal dwellings, powering bioluminescent lights, flickering cephalopod skin televisions, medicinal sea squirts, and countless other devices that had been bred from living creatures. The advances in biology had risen exponentially until genetic engineering was completely mastered. Modern breeders did not even need to use animals. A simple manipulation of cultured tissues and stem cells would give solutions to any problem at hand. The mastery of genetics had conquered many obstacles. The yawning ocean depths, as well as the planet's few tiny land masses, were now firmly within the breeder's grasp. However, they were not content in mere planetary dreams. New forms and bizarre creatures were still being developed, in daring attempts to conquer the one realm that was most hostile to life. Sealed in their living ships, the breeders wished to return to the stars. A breeder huntress on a garden reef. Living tools are an indispensable part of these beings' daily lives. She manages to breathe underwater through an oxygen-filtering crustacean fitted over her blowhole. She holds a mollusk-derived rifle that shoots out specially modified fish teeth, and her companion, a brain-augmented fish that has been hardwired to return kills. Buildings made from calcified shells glitter in the background, ablaze with bioluminescence. Saurosapiens, livestock of the lizard herders. One of humanity's eventual inheritors were not even human. They came from the reptilian stock that had proliferated during the demise of lizard herders. Theirs was a true case of world turned upside down. As the humans degenerated into witless animals, cold-blooded reptiles prospered in the tropical climate of their planet. Millennia passed, and they began to produce increasingly smarter forms, one of which, distantly resembling feathered versions of the predatory dinosaurs of the past, eventually crossed over the threshold of sentience and built up a series of civilizations. These fledgling cultures were quick to understand the true origin of the monstrous ruins littering their planets. Ruin, until that, have been considered natural aberrations or timeless memorabilia of gods. Now, however, they saw the intermingled ruins of the Ku and the Star People for what they really were. It was through this understanding that the biologically unrelated Sauros took up the cultural identity of humanity. In their archaeological efforts, the Sauros began to understand the animals they used for food and labor were descended from the founders of their very existence. And somewhere in the stars lurked the forces that malformed them, forces greater than the Star People, dark forces that might someday return. The human animals served as a reminder, just as Pandaravis had, that if the Saurosapiens wanted to assure their continued existence in the cosmos, they had to be watchful. The pressure of such a reality put their cultures under enormous stress. Some factions turned to made-up religions and remained ignorant under an umbrella of comforting fantasies. Others acknowledged the threats of the galaxies, but reverted to a paranoid rhetoric of conservatism. A galaxy had scared them greatly. Finally, there were those who saw the galactic redoubt and acted to face the odds. However great they might be, conflicts and even wars were not uncommon between these three factions. In the end, the century-long dispute began to resolve in the progressive faction's favor. As they expanded their spheres of knowledge, influence, and activity, the Saurosapiens became as human as any other civilization opening up to the galaxy. Modular people, descendants of the colonials. The blind workings of evolution followed in the unlikeliest paths, made use of one of the most fleeting opportunities. The very existence of the modular people was testimony to this fact. Their ancestors, the colonials, would have been seen as hopeless cripples by almost any observer. They lacked coherent organs, and their existence was limited to carpeting water shores like mats of algae. But as degenerate as they were, the colonials were resilient survivors, able to hold on to life in the harshest of conditions. As time passed, they began to organize themselves in differentiated colonies instead of homogeneous mats. In the colonies, each human cell would perform singular function and benefit from the union of others. Thus began the great age of organization, during which different colonies competed with each other by developing specialized human cells that would give them an edge in the struggle for life. Some colonies grew enormous taproots that were able to siphon resources from far away. Others abandoned roots altogether began to move themselves on starfish-like foot segments. Some colonies came up with units equipped with claws and poisons, taking competition to a brand new, deadly level. Others responded to the threat with armor plating or watcher cells equipped with enormous eyes. The eventual winner of the colonial arms race was a sentient colony, organized around hyper-specialized units, whose entire purpose was to direct the others. These colonies spread around the planet as they adapted the parts of their rivals to function within themselves. Thus were the modular people born. Living in fully industrialized megapoly, they came in the indescribable variation of shapes and sizes, anything from castle-like guardian forests to diminutive scuttling couriers, was a member of the modular whole. They could combine with each other and split up, or exchange parts as needed, as the needs presented themselves. The only thing constant in all of their protean existence was their mental and cultural unity. Due to their biological structure, these people had managed the impossible. They were actually living in a world of peace and utopian equality, where everybody was happy to be parts of greater united wholes. A modular colony treats a specialized digester unit with sprays of anti-ulcer medication produced by the medical drone held in its hands. Note the differing segments, each of them mutated human beings in themselves. Alright, that'll be all for this part. The next part should be coming up soon. See you later.